Hello again, my little conscripts, and welcome to another Mordian Glory video. In today's episode, I'm going to be talking about all of the factions in Bolt Action 3rd edition. That's right, from the great powers such as Germany and the United States, all the way through to the minor factions such as the Netherlands and Hungary. I'm going to be focusing on the pros and cons of each faction so you can decide which is the best army for you. And so, without further ado, let's not mess around any further. Let's fix bayonets and blitzkrieg our way right into today's episode. Attention conscripts, I am excited to announce the launch of the official 2nd Mordian Glory channel. If you're curious, click on the link down in the description and head over to Mordian Glory Games. I upload to the channel several times a week with all sorts of fun and silly gaming content. So if you're jonesing for even more Mordian Glory content, then head on over to Mordian Glory Games and don't forget to subscribe. Let us begin with the main bad guys of World War II and the foremost Axis power, Germany. First up, we have the German Army Special Rules. This is Blitzkrieg, where your officers can do an extra Snap 2. That means your platoon commanders can do 3 Snap 2s and your company commanders can do 5. This is a fantastic special rule and very, very powerful. With the ability to take multiples of things now, such as multiple medium mortars or multiple Nebelwerfers, being able to take a cheap 30-point platoon commander or even an inexperienced one for 21 points and just go, you men, snap to action, and then snap to an entire platoon of mortars allows Germany to deliver alpha strikes unlike any other faction. Next, we have initiative training. When an infantry squad's NCO is killed, you roll a dice, and on a 2+, another model becomes the NCO, and they get the equipment of the old one. So if you've got a basic rifleman, and he becomes the new sergeant, he would pick up the old NCO's STG assault rifle or submachine gun. Not only does this make you essentially immune to snipers, but it also can allow you to keep your machine guns firing at peak efficiency for longer. For example, let's say you have a 5-man squad with 2 LMGs in it, 2 loaders and an NCO. You take a casualty on that squad. Now you could remove one of the loaders, but then that would mean one of your LMGs would be firing at -1 to hit. So what you do instead is you purposely choose for your NCO to die. Then you get to roll the dice for initiative training. You roll that 2+, you successfully get it off, and bam. One of your loaders, who was previously a basic rifleman, has now got an STG assault rifle, and not only is he the loader, but he's also now the NCO of the squad, allowing your machine guns to keep firing and keeping your squad's morale nice and high. The last army rule is the buzzsaw. This gives your light and medium machine guns 1 extra shot. This is just a straight damage boost and is really good. These special rules on their own are very powerful, but don't forget Germany is a major player in this game and in the war, and so as a result they have got all of the unit variety you could ever want. On the infantry front, you've got everything from inexperienced shirkers all the way up to dead hard fanatics and everything in between. You can take veteran Fallschirmjäger who are incredibly stubborn, or you can take STG wielding Volksgrenadiers. Whatever you want, the Germans have got it, and that's just on the infantry front. They've got all the support teams you could want with machine guns, anti-tank teams, snipers, flamethrowers, mortars, and for their artillery, not only do they get access to howitzers, but they also have access to multiple rocket launchers, with the Neb being an infamous unit on the battlefields of Bolt Action. Finally, we have the tanks. My god, the tanks. The Germans have got it all. You can have light tanks equipped with autocannons and recce, or you can have super heavy behemoths like the Tiger II with only the thickest of armor and the biggest of guns. Truthfully, the Germans don't have many weaknesses in 3rd edition. But if I was to really nitpick, I would say that they do have a bit of an issue with their medium tanks with medium anti-tank guns not having something like improved HE. This is something you will find very common in the Allies, and it allows the Allies to save points because they can have medium tanks like Shermans or Cromwells still be totally okay at dealing with infantry with their main guns, whereas the Germans tend to have to either go for more expensive vehicles like the Panzer IV to have that heavy anti-tank gun so you can get that 2-inch HE template, or they have to accept that their vehicles are going to be more specialized in roles, such as the Panzer III, which has a light howitzer, versus the Panzer III, which has that medium anti-tank gun. Overall, it's easy to say that the Germans are an incredibly powerful faction in Bolt Action 3rd edition, and if you're looking to get into the Axis powers, these guys are where you should start. Next up, we have one of the major allied powers, the United States. The US has some amazing army special rules. Firstly, there's fire and maneuver, which gives you an extra shot for every 3 riflemen you have in one of your infantry squads. Considering that the US can take up to 12 men in each unit, this can be the equivalent of getting a free LMG in each one of your squads. Next, we have gyro stabilizers. This means that any veteran vehicle crew ignores the -1 to hit penalty for moving and shooting. Now, veteran vehicles can be kind of expensive, but don't forget that the Americans have got a lot of different tanks to choose from. You can take Stuart tanks, which a veteran come in at 172 points. That's very, very affordable. Or if you want a medium vehicle, you have Sherman tanks, which you can decrease the points on by taking them easily catches fire or have weak sides. And this means that you can offset that veteran rule and end up with a medium tank without that penalty to moving and shooting for a very affordable price point. Thirdly, we have the air superiority rule. This means that your forward air observer may call in an additional airstrike instead of just one. Considering that airstrikes have been much improved in 3rd edition, this has gone from being an okay rule in 2nd edition to actually being downright lethal in 3rd. Finally, yeah, there is one more. The Americans do get 4 special rules. We have got modern communications. When a unit takes an order test to move from reserve onto the table, they do not apply the usual -1 penalty. They just get to take the test on their basic morale. This is often one that is overlooked, but let me tell you, as someone who's played a few games, there's nothing worse than a key unit not turning up when you need it to, and the Americans can avoid that scenario. As is the case with most major powers, the Americans have not only got good special rules, but they've also got the unit variety to back them up. In your infantry selection, you've got all of the usual things you would expect to find. You've got infantry squads that can be taken at inexperienced, regular, or veteran. They've got access to all sorts of special equipment, like submachine guns. And you've also got the fact that you can take airborne squads for stubborn, and the unique ranger squad, which gets a free run at the beginning of the game. The Americans do also get all sorts of weapon teams, and they have the anti-tank stuff that you would expect, but when it comes to their armor, it would be easy for people to just think it's Shermans, Shermans, Shermans. And whilst the Sherman is a very, very good vehicle, and in the new edition it's kind of like Build-A-Bear, don't underestimate a lot of the other American options. They can get light tanks. They do get a wide variety of tank destroyers, and they have got access to heavy tanks as well with the Pershing. The Americans also have a couple of bits of unique equipment that the other allies don't really get access to. So you've got the BAR, which can be taken widespread throughout your army and is essentially 2-shot long-range rifle, giving you an extra bit of firepower. And then you've also got the bazooka. Now, the bazooka, I think, has an advantage over the German Panzerschreck because it's cheaper. The Panzerschreck is like 80 points, which is very, very expensive. I feel like you might as well go for an anti-tank gun at that point. But the bazooka only comes in at 60 points, and I think might be one of the best infantry anti-tank weapons in the game. However, the Americans do have a couple of small disadvantages. The first one is they don't get access to the heaviest of armor, so you won't see anything like a super heavy tank in American lists. And also, when it comes to their special rules, you feel like you want to use them, but maybe they don't come up as much as you would like. So if you decide to load up your squads with SMGs and BARs, then you're not taking advantage of your fire and maneuver special rule. If you don't take any veteran vehicles, you're not taking advantage of gyro stabilizers. If it's a mission that doesn't use reserves, you're not taking advantage of modern communications. So whilst all of the American special rules are good, unlike, I would say, the Germans, where they're kind of passively always on, with the Americans, you kind of have to actively spec into them if you want to get the most out of them. With all of that said, I still think that the US is a very, very potent faction and could arguably be the more powerful of the Allied armies. And as a British person, that pains me to say it. But speaking of Great Britain, they are the next faction we're going to have a look at. I'm not going to lie, I think the Brits have taken a few hard knocks in this edition. Firstly, you only really get 2 army special rules. Firstly, you've got artillery support, which allows your observer to call in an additional bombardment. A bit like the US air observer can call into airstrikes, the British artillery observer can call into artillery strikes. This is a pretty decent special rule, but remember, most of the time, the artillery is just going to be doing a few pins, so it's not quite as impactful as that American air observer, who is going to be calling in all sorts of strafing runs and actually doing damage. And then you have your second national characteristic, which isn't actually fixed, you get to pick it from a list. There's Up and At Them, which allows you to reroll some charges. You've got Blood Curdling Charge, which means the enemy can't fire reaction fire against you when you charge them. Tough as Old Boots, which gives you extra attacks in close combat. Rapid Fire, which gives your rifle-armed regular and veteran infantry bonus shots when they use the fire order. So it is a strictly worse version than the American one, which always gets the extra shots on any level of veterancy. And then you've got Vengeance, which your regular and veteran units might be able to remove 1 pin marker from themselves if the enemy is close to them. In my humble opinion, none of these are particularly exciting. Up and At Them, Blood Curdling Charge, and Tough as Old Boots are all combat focused, and assaults have become a lot riskier in 3rd edition, and you only really do them if you're going to finish off a unit that you're almost guaranteed to beat. For example, there might be 1 or 2 German conscripts hiding in a hole, and you need to charge them off an objective so that they're no longer contesting it. Rapid Fire is possibly the best one, but considering you only get it when you stand still, it doesn't feel great. And then Vengeance, I don't know, just not feeling it. Out of all of the national characteristics that you pick, I would either go for Rapid Fire or Tough as Old Boots. At the end of the day, they are direct damage boosts to your army and are therefore the ones that are most likely to impact the game. But if the British special rules are a little lackluster, their unit selection is the complete opposite. They are a major faction. They have everything that you want. But on top of that, they've also got access to some unique units. And I would say one of the defining things about the British in this game is their proclivity. They're absolutely festooned with veteran infantry options. You've got your paratroop sections, you've got your Chindits, you've got your special forces sections, which represent your Marines and your SAS, and you've also got your Gurkhas. And all of these bring something different to the table. The paratroopers are innately stubborn and get loads and loads of SMGs. You've got the Chindits, which can do outflanking and ignore the -1 to the order test for coming onto the table, kind of emulating one of the American special rules. You've also got your special forces infantry sections, which can either be wannabe Germans because they can get the Vickers K machine gun, which gets the extra shot, so you're getting that sort of pseudo buzzsaw rule. You also get fanatics on them as well. They're tough fighters, they can outflank good. And you've got the Gurkha sections, which are almost inarguably the best combat unit in the game because they are inbuilt tough fighters, and when they assault enemy units, the enemy unit only gets half of their attacks, rounding up. So we said that assaults are kind of risky, but if you've got Gurkhas with Tough as Old Boots, assault is absolutely fine. Another brilliant British unit is their light howitzer, the 25-pounder. This can be upgraded for 5 points to have an AT shell, making it both a light howitzer and a light anti-tank gun, making it an incredibly flexible unit and an auto-include in many British army lists. I know some players may raise an eyebrow at that hot take, but remember, this is 3rd edition. There are a lot more vehicles out there, and your opponent might run a tank-heavy skew list. And having a unit which for just 5 points can help supplement your anti-tank is very valuable. It will guard you against extremes of list without you having to get whole extra units in your army. Finally, one other great thing about the Brits is they get to plunder the American stockpiles. Thanks to Lend-Lease, not only do the British have all of their own tank designs, but you could also take some of the best American ones as well, such as the Stuarts and the Grants and Lees and the Shermans. overall, whilst the British special rules might leave something to be desired, you will find that their unit selection is impeccable, and often those units have their own special rules which make up for a lack of army rule. Now, sticking with the Allies for the time being, but going over to the Eastern Front, next up we've got the Soviet Union. As is tradition, let's begin with those special rules. First up, you've got the Great Patriotic War. Whenever an infantry or artillery model fails a morale check and would otherwise be destroyed as a consequence, you get to take the test again and apply the second result. This is really good. It means that often your units which are going to break and flee will get another chance to hold their ground. That's going to keep dice in the bag, and more often than not means your opponent has to overkill your units, making their firepower a little bit less efficient. Next you have For the Motherland. This is essentially the same as the British Vengeance, where you get a chance to remove a pin if you're near the enemy, but it only works on inexperienced units. Thirdly, we have Not One Step Backwards. This allows each rifle platoon to include an additional officer, a commissar. Commissars can execute models if they fail order tests to make them re-roll that test. Finally, we have Mass Batteries. When rolling to determine the fire for effect radius from an artillery barrage, you get to roll 2d6 and pick the highest. Looking at these rules in passing, you might be forgiven for thinking that the Soviets weren't very good, but after playing a few games with them, I have found them to be phenomenally powerful. This power comes from their reliability. Due to the fact that they reroll morale tests, they're rerolling order tests, they pretty much always do as they are told, and this gives the player incredible control over their army. I'm not going to lie to you though, For the Motherland and Mass Batteries are very underwhelming, but the other two special rules more than make up for it. As for their units, the Soviets get access to everything you would expect at this point from a major power. But one thing that really stood out to me is how many SMGs they can put in their units. Any man in their regular infantry squads can have a submachine gun. Any man in their veteran infantry squads can have a submachine gun. Every man in a tank rider squad has to have a submachine gun, whether you want them to or not. Not only this, but multiple veteran units can take body armor, meaning that they can only be wounded on 6s from small arms, which can make them very hard to deal with if you don't have the right tools. Another big positive about the Soviet unit selection is they get 3 anti-tank teams. Any mix of anti-tank rifles, Ampoulement anti-tank teams, and Dogmine anti-tank teams as one anti-tank team selection. So you can have 3 anti-tank choices in your rifle platoon, potentially saving you points on having to get an extra platoon to get the anti-tank in your army. But of course, we can't talk about Soviet units and not talk about Soviet tanks. And here you are not disappointed. Soviets can get all of the light, medium, heavy armor that you could possibly want. From the tiny T-26 all the way up to the mighty KV and IS heavy tanks. There's also tank destroyers such as the Su-85 and Su-100, as well as self-propelled artillery with the Su-76, and of course, who can forget the mighty KV-2, Stalin's fridge, and naturally you've got the Katyusha as well. Long story short, the Soviets don't really have any major disadvantages. I suppose you could point to their army special rules not giving them any direct damage, but thanks to them being much more reliable, they're doing a lot of indirect damage by sticking around. They get a lot of indirect durability from that as well. And not only do they get dead hard reliable infantry, but they can back that up with almost any kind of tank that you want. But our last major faction for today is the Imperial Japanese. Their first army special rule is Death Before Dishonor. Every unit in this list has the Fanatic special rule. I cannot overstate how mind-bogglingly good this is. Every unit in your army is essentially fearless. It will not break when it takes too many pins. It will not break if it loses a round of combat. It gets to ignore modifiers to its leadership when hit from things like flamethrowers. You thought the Soviets were sticky? Ha! They are merely amateurs in comparison to how goddamn sticky those Imperial Japanese are going to be. You are going to have to kill every last one of them from a unit to get that dice out of the bag. And that is going to require substantial firepower. Unfortunately, things go downhill very, very quickly after that first special rule. Next, we have the Banzai charge. This has been heavily nerfed from 2nd edition. It used to mean that you could just get up and run. Didn't matter how many pins you had, didn't even need to do an order test for you. Just get up and run, and you had to try and run towards the nearest enemy unit. Now, it means that if you are within assault range, you get to do the order test, and if you fail, you get to re-roll it. Finally, you have Show Your Loyalty. You can include a single Kempai-type political officer for each rifle platoon. They don't confer any morale bonus to nearby troops, but when doing a green test, if within 6 inches of a Kempai-type political officer, you can re-roll it. It's like a really crappy version of the Soviet one with the commissars. Honestly, I would have rather just had the Soviet commissar rule here. Now, when I first saw these Japanese army special rules, I was very disheartened. Losing the Banzai charge was definitely a big blow. But after playing a game with my Japanese, I can confidently say that it turned out that it wasn't the Banzai charge which made the army broken. It was the army-wide fanatics, and we've kept that, so we are still very much in this game. Moving on to the unit selection, the Imperial Japanese feel really unique here. It would be wrong to say that they have a limited unit selection. It's right to say that their units just do things very differently to a lot of the other major armies. Some stuff is going to be familiar. You've got your officers and your medics and your forward observers. You've got machine gun teams and medium mortars and stuff like that. But when you start looking at the infantry units and the tanks, this is where you start to realize the unique nature, the way the Japanese army is going to play. One of the things you will notice about Japanese units is they don't get access to a lot of submachine guns. In fact, typically you can have 1 or 2 in a unit. What they have instead is things like their grenadier squads, where you can get up to 3 light mortars in a single unit. And light mortars got a huge buff in 3rd edition. They now have a 36-inch range. And so you don't need to be out there putting light mortars in your platoons. You can just have light mortars in your squads. Another often overlooked thing about the Japanese is that they get a lot of men in each unit. You can have up to 15 soldiers in each squad. That's more than the Americans. That's even more than the Soviet Union. These big squads, combined with that fanatic special rule, can make the Japanese infantry very dense and very tough. But if we're going to talk about Japanese infantry and infantry-based things, we have to talk about 2 units. One is very iconic but quite controversial. The other is quite powerful. The controversial option is, well, I'm not allowed to say the word on YouTube for fear of getting demonetized, but we'll call them the Unalive Anti-Tank Team. The Unalive Anti-Tank Team works by assaulting an enemy vehicle, and if the model manages to move into contact with the target, the model is then immediately removed, and you resolve the hit against the vehicle with a penetration value of +8. I think that might be the most powerful shot you get in the game, because light anti-tank is a 4, medium is a 5, heavy is a 6, super heavy is a 7. So these unalive anti-tank teams can hit vehicles with the biggest, most penetrating shot in the game. But of course, they have to move into contact, and then you are going to have to remove that model from the board and remove that dice from the bag. So there's a bit of a trade-off there. They are very cheap though. You can take them for 14 points each, and you can get up to 3 of them in 1 slot, a bit like with the Soviets and their anti-tank rifles. While some people may feel a bit squeamish and may have a few qualms about using a unit like this, as someone who has used them regularly throughout 2nd edition and now 3rd edition, I can tell you that psychologically they're very impactful because no one wants to get hit by that, and 2, they are very powerful if you can get that hit off. But speaking of powerful, Japanese get the AA automatic cannon. This is 35 points and you get 1 automatic cannon on a rotating platform. That is cheaper than a medium machine gun and arguably way more powerful because it's got better penetrating power, so it can actually pen up enemy vehicles, putting pins on them, and it's firing multiple templates, so it can shred infantry as well. The last aspect of the Imperial Japanese in bolt action I want to touch upon is their tanks. They don't really get any heavy ones. You will be getting lots of armored carriers like Armor 7+. You'll be getting a lot of light tanks, and you'll be getting some medium tanks, but you're not going to be getting any heavy tanks or super heavy tanks. On the one hand, this does mean your armor is very fragile. On the other, it means your armor is very cheap. You'll probably find Japanese armies getting 2, 3, 4, or even 5 tanks in their army list for the price of everyone else putting 2 or 3 in. They're going to have a lot of armored vehicles, and whilst each one individually won't be very powerful, if used en masse or deployed on the flank, they could be quite an effective spearheading force. Oh, and nearly every Japanese tank of some variety can be given a light howitzer. That's a hell of a lot of HE. That is a hell of a lot of indirect fire if combined with the new spotter and forward observer rules. In summary, the Imperial Japanese army on the surface might look like a bit of a weak faction, like not really a major power, more of a middling power, but that is actually hiding their true strength. They don't fight worse than everyone else, they just fight differently. One of the things that you will need to take into account when facing off against the Japanese is how different they feel to play against. They're going to keep you off balance. And if you're an Imperial Japanese player, you don't want to try and emulate the other way people fight. You want to lean into your army strengths more than anything else. But that covers all of the major powers, but what about the minor powers, the other small nations that took part in World War II that you can play in Bolt Action 3rd edition? First up, we have got Bulgaria, a minor Axis power. The Bulgarians get 2 army special rules. Firstly, they have Axis support. A Bulgarian force may include a single unit from either the German or Italian army lists, although no German or Italian army special rules apply except for the buzzsaw. The unit must be included as part of a platoon, taking the slot of the equivalent unit type, and may not be one of that platoon's mandatory units. In addition, this unit may not be a veteran unit nor a vehicle with a damage value of 10 or higher. This special rule is very important to the Bulgarians because, as you will see, their unit selection is rather limited. So being able to draw on the Axis support allows them to plug some holes that their own army can't normally cover. Their second special rule is roving patrols. When fighting against Bulgarians, enemy snipers, observers and spotters cannot use their special deployment rules and must instead be deployed like the rest of the force. In addition, enemies cannot outflank the Bulgarians but must always come in from their own table edge when arriving from reserve. Again, a great special rule. Not being able to forward deploy observers, snipers, means they're not going to get the angles that they want. This could help keep your officers safe from snipers, but more importantly, it's probably going to really screw up the lines of sight that a lot of the enemy artillery is going to want to rely upon. Not to mention that this special rule flat out counters and cancels certain other armies' special rules, such as Partisans, who essentially the Bulgarians get to hard counter. For unit selection, it's pretty basic. You have all of the ingredients you need to make some standard platoons. You've got an officer, you've got infantry, you've got all the different weapon teams, but that's not to say the Bulgarians don't have any flavour whatsoever. Their first unique unit is their mounted section. Unlike most other cavalry, you don't use these to charge into people or run them down. Rather, they can't charge whilst mounted, but they don't suffer the -1 to the leadership from coming from reserves, making them a potentially reliable flanking force. You've also got their anti-tank guns, which are only allowed to be light AT, but you can spend 5 points to make them a hybrid weapon, where they become the Skoda 37mm/70mm hybrid gun, and this allows it to swap between a light anti-tank gun and a light howitzer, similar to the British 25-pounder. While some of these units are interesting, sadly, they don't entirely make up for the completely diabolically bad vehicle selection the Bulgarians have. They have precisely 3: a CV-33 tankette, a Samua, I'm definitely pronounced that incorrectly, S-35, a Renault R-35, that's it. All of these are really bad. Like, really, really bad. Because of this, if you want any hope in being able to deal with enemy tanks, you're going to need to ally something in from the Germans with the Axis support, because you can't rely on your own tanks to deal with enemy tanks, and your anti-tank gun is at most a light AT. So how I see most Bulgarian armies coming together is they'll lean heavily on their own infantry, they'll have plenty of weapon teams, but they're going to need a big German tank in there. Probably a Panther or Panzer IV at the very least, that can actually knock out enemy armor. Otherwise, they're just going to get overrun. Our next minor faction is another Axis one and a favourite in the bolt action community, Finland. The Finns get 4 army special rules. First up, you have trained huntsmen. As long as any Finnish infantry unit has an ambush order dice next to it, it can reroll morale checks. Also, when the unit opens fire from ambush, all models in the unit that are armed with a rifle, including snipers, get an additional +1 to hit. This is going to make your ambushes very reliable, and they're going to hit really hard as well. Next is Sisu. When a Finnish infantry or artillery unit is reduced to 50% or less of its starting strength, the remaining models in that unit are automatically upgraded to a higher quality. So inexperienced troops become regular, and regular become veterans, while veteran units increase their base morale to 11. I mean, that's just amazing. You're just getting free upgrades. Sure, you might have lost half of your guys, but it's still amazing. It means that just when you think you've got the Finnish units wrapped up, they're going to get just that much tougher and just that much braver as well. Second to last, we have Motti. This means that Finnish infantry units ignore the -1 modifier to the ore test for coming on the table, a bit like reserves for the Americans. And then you've got skis. All infantry units may be equipped with skis for free. Ski troops ignore movement penalties for snow and other winter conditions. That last one isn't often going to come up, but it's cool to have it. I'm just going to be real with you guys. All of these special rules are phenomenal, and they're obviously pointing you in a certain direction. Finnish army is going to be characterized by their infantry. And this is made even more readily apparent when you get into the infantry options that they have. They basically don't get inexperienced infantry. Everything is either regular or veteran. And considering that a lot of the regular stuff is probably going to uprate to veteran thanks to Sisu, you're essentially going to get a whole army of veterans, which is just sickeningly good. The Finns do get all sorts of generic options like basic rifle squads and machine gun teams, but what jumps out to me is their light infantry squad and their long distance recon squads. The light infantry get masters of the hunt. This means that they can advance, and if they do not shoot, then they can turn that advance into an ambush. Ambush is really powerful because it means that you get to shoot the enemy after they've moved. Now, often what this means is you get to put a pin on the enemy unit, meaning they hit at -1, reducing the enemy's effectiveness. The long distance recon squads don't have that, but they do have medic, so they get basically to do the whole roll of 6 not to die against small arms thing, so they get a free medic inbuilt. And then they have deep strike mission. When they come in from reserve, they don't have to come in on the left or right, they can actually come in from the enemy's own table edge as well, making them perfect for hunting those fragile weapon teams like mortars and howitzers that like to hang at the back out of line of sight. However, it is not all sunshines and rainbows for the Finns, and where they struggle is in the vehicle selection. Whilst they do get access to a wide variety of vehicles, nearly all of which are captured Soviet vehicles of some kind, either light tanks or medium tanks or heavy tanks, nearly all of them are going to come with the unreliable special rule. This means that each time one of their vehicles suffers a pin marker from being hit, they suffer an additional further pin marker. This can mean that the pins really add up on these vehicles, making it hard for them to pass order tests, and if they do, they're going to be shooting unreliably as well. When it comes to Finnish armor, I think you are best sticking to the Stug 3 Sturmy. This is not unreliable, and it's essentially a German Stug. It's 185 points regular. It comes with a casemate mounted forward-facing heavy anti-tank gun and one medium machine gun, and it's armor 9. You're going to have some issues, of course, because it's going to be stuck facing forward, could make it susceptible to those side shots, but I would rather take that Stug 3 over any of those better armed or armoured, unreliable captured vehicles. Bringing all of this together, the Finns are a very good army, but they're going to struggle with dealing with enemy armour, which could be very prevalent in the new edition, with multiple vehicles now being possible. And whilst their troops are very high quality, and often you will out-quality all of your opponents, they do have to pay for their quality. Things like that long-distance recon squad might be amazing, but you're paying 23 points per dude. This makes Finnish armies very high quality, but very low quantity and susceptible to heavy armor. Our next faction is technically a minor faction, but honestly, they could be counted as a major faction. We are looking at La France, the France. The French have 3 army special rules. The first one is forward artillery doctrine. This is the same as the British one, where you get to call in an extra artillery bombardment from one of your forward artillery observers. We then have highly motivated reserves. This is the same as for the motherland, for the Soviets, where your inexperienced infantry, if they are within 12 inches of the enemy, get a chance to try and lose 1 pin marker. Lastly, we have the VB launcher. This is less of a special rule. It's more the details for a bit of special equipment that some units can be upgraded to have. The VB launcher essentially allows you to fire a light mortar shot, but it only has a 6 to 18 inch range. I'm going to level with you. The French special rules aren't very exciting. You'll actually find that a lot of other minor factions have the same special rules as the French. But where the flavour comes with this army is not necessarily in the special rules, but with that unique VB launcher, which is very cool, and they get lots of different unique unit choices. For example, you have the Chasseurs Alpine Veteran Infantry Section, which is veteran, can get quite a few submachine guns, and you can get 2 light machine guns, and you can get a VB launcher, and you get the skis for free. You have another veteran selection. In fact, side note, you get a lot of veteran choices with the French. So you've got the Foreign Legion Infantry Section. Again, veterans, like I said, and they can get the VB launcher, they can get a light machine gun, but they come with stubborn inbuilt. You've then got the Moroccans, which are also veteran. They don't get many weapon options, but everyone in the squad gets tough fighter. It's worth noting as well that a lot of these infantry choices, whether they are inexperienced generic infantry sections all the way up to things like your Moroccans, can get quite a lot of men in the squad. Typically, you find squads cap out at sort of 10 models, but the French tend to get between 11 and 12 models per squad if you max them out. One thing I really like about the generic French infantry section is that you can make it completely not generic. You can upgrade the entire squad for 1 point per model to have tough fighters. This represents the Senegalese. Now, bear in mind that you can take these guys as inexperienced. This means that you could have a 12-man inexperienced squad, which is 84 points. Everyone gets tough fighters. That's actually a very cost-effective, decent assault unit. Because sure, it's going to get the crap punched out of it, but it's also going to be punching the crap out of the enemy with all those rerolls in combat. And being inexperienced, it will benefit from the highly motivated reserves rule, which might come in handy when you need to launch a desperate counter-attack. But it's not just the French infantry which has got flavour. Their tanks are very cool as well. You can take everything from the Renault FT, yes, the World War I tank, all the way up to the mighty Char 2C, which can be upgraded, one per army, to a heavy tank. That might not seem like such a big deal, but bear in mind that the French are really meant to be played in the early war, and being able to bring a heavy tank to early war is unique and potentially quite powerful. But I don't think that the French are limited to the early war. They do have enough tools in their toolbox to be able to play later than that as well. For example, the Char B1 is a medium tank which costs 220 points, which is in line with most other medium tanks in the game. And it comes with not only a light anti-tank gun, but also a light howitzer and a hull-mounted medium machine gun. Sure, it's got some drawbacks like the one-man turret and slow, but it is armoured all round. This means that it is durable enough to go into the later war, and it's got the firepower to be able to do that as well, because it essentially has two main guns, whereas everyone else has to choose between a howitzer or an anti-tank gun. Bringing this all together, I think saying the French are a minor faction is a bit unfair. Whilst their special rules aren't much to write home about, their unit selection is varied enough and wide enough to make the faction very interesting, very flavourful and very fun to play. Whilst they are designed for the early war, I think you could play them into the mid and late war and at least be able to go down swinging. Another minor allied faction you can play is Greece. The Greek special rules are surprisingly spicy. Battlefield knowledge gives you 3 bonuses. Firstly, any Greek unit that is set on the table before turn 1 may start the game in ambush. Secondly, in the first turn of the game, all Greek infantry counts having fieldcraft. And thirdly, when attempting an outflanking maneuver, Greek units ignore the maximum modifier to the order test. Being able to start the game in ambush may reduce the chance of you pulling out the first dice, but in a weird sort of way, you've already got the first dice that you want, and putting anti-tank guns or infantry or machine guns on ambush could be a great way of forcing your opponent to take a bunch of pins from the get-go. And whilst your enemy is struggling forward under withering hails of fire, your infantry are going to be really fast because fieldcraft allows you to essentially move through cover without penalty. They also get the VB launcher. That's right. Even the French unique bit of equipment apparently isn't unique. The Greeks have got it as well. However, the difference here is that the Greeks can only take one of them per infantry squad. So they're not going to be spamming them quite as much as the French are. And speaking of the unit selection for the Greeks, a lot of it's quite generic. You've got officers, you've got infantry sections, you've got cavalry, machine guns, anti-tanks, but nothing here is really jumping out to me as a unique Greek unit. In fact, this extends to their vehicles as well, which all seem to have essentially been pilfered or bought from the Allies. They can take Renault FTs, they can take Vickers light tanks, and for their armoured cars, they've got the L3 tankette, they've got the Peerless armoured car, and their transports they can get are the Bren carrier. In summary, from an in-game perspective, I kind of see the Greeks as the opposite to the French. They've got much more flavourful special rules, but their unit selection is a lot more limited, especially when it comes to anti-tank, because the best they can get is a light AT gun. That's going to make them susceptible to armoured forces. From the Allies back over to the Axis, we have got Hungary. Their army special rules are exactly the same as the Bulgarians. You've got Axis support and you have got roving patrols. But don't be fooled. These armies are very, very different, and it becomes immediately apparent when you start looking at their unit selection. For example, their basic infantry section is surprisingly deep. Not only can you take as inexperienced, regular, or veteran, but it can be taken up to 14 men strong, which is quite large. larger than I can think of a lot of other factions. And then they've got lots of equipment, like some machine guns, light machine guns, Panzerfaust, but where they shine is with the special rules they can take. The entire squad could be engineers, then they can take a flamethrower, or if they're veterans, they could be stubborn, representing power troops, or you can have fieldcraft, which represents the mountain troops. So it might only look like, oh, I've only got one infantry choice, but actually it represents a lot of different things. Another very distinctive and unique unit for the Hungarians is the Mace Thrower. This is a rocket launcher that you can find in your anti-tank gun selection. It is fixed team shape charge. It's got a 2-rocket salvo. The weapon has 2 ammunition types and has the below profiles. Declare which profile you are using before firing. You must load 2 rockets of the same type, so the next shot taken on a subsequent turn will need to use the same profile. Then, when both rockets have been fired, you can start the process again. So you've got the Mace, which has got a 36-inch range, pen +7. That's really good. Or you've got the Rainfall, which is a 36-inch range and has a pen HE 3-inch template. So essentially, for 120 points, you can have both a super heavy anti-tank shot or a medium howitzer shot. That's really good. It's also a small carriage. The weapon system was actually mounted on captured Soviet Max machine gun carriages. As such, the weapon was too small to tow behind a vehicle. The crew and weapon are instead counted as infantry when being transported, taking up 6 transport slots inside a vehicle. The crew may move the weapon to 6 inches when given a run order, even over rough ground. In addition, the Hungarians get access to the 150mm Nebelwerfer. Nebs are really good, and for a minor faction to get that kind of firepower is very impressive. But wait, there's more! The Hungarians aren't content with having some very cool infantry and unique artillery and access to some of the best German artillery. They also get loads of their own vehicles that they can draw upon. There's the 40M Turan, which is a medium tank boasting a light anti-tank gun, coaxial medium machine gun, and forward-facing hull-mounted medium machine gun, coming in at 175 points. And you can replace the light anti-tank gun with a medium anti-tank gun, essentially giving you a Panzer III. Then there's the Toldi 2. This is a light tank, which comes with an anti-tank rifle and coaxial medium machine gun, which sounds trash, but then you can replace the anti-tank rifle with a light anti-tank gun for 35 points, bringing it in at 125 points. Yeah, it's a light anti-tank with a coaxial medium machine gun, but it is pretty cheap at 125. I really like the look of the CV-33 tankette. It is Armor 7+, and you can upgrade it to be the CV-35, so it's got 2 medium machine guns, and that's only 65 points regular. I'm really serious, you could spam the crap out of those CV-35s, and you would get an ungodly amount of DACA for it. That would be tricky to deal with for a lot of armies. Last but not least, we have the 43M Żyrny 2. This is a medium tank which costs 200 points. It comes with a medium howitzer, which is a big gun, and it comes with a medium machine gun, which has a 360-degree arc of fire, and you can give it a pintle mounted medium machine gun. But the downside is that you can only choose to fire the Żyrny's main gun or that crew-carried medium machine gun. So that can reduce its firepower a little bit if you don't end up taking the pintle. It's a little pricey. But what I really like about the Hungarians is they can stand on their own 2 feet when it comes to armoured support. Unlike the Bulgarians, who have got fine infantry choices, but really are going to need to lean on the Axis support heavily, the Hungarians can go for the Axis support if they need it, and they probably will do. But you can build a pure Hungarian army and do quite well with it. And you've got all the tools you need to fight in the early, mid, and late war. Those Turans, when made into pseudo-Panzer IIIs, are a great choice and eminently spammable. And I really like combining that with the CV-35 tankettes, and then some of the crazy Nebelwerfers and Mace Throwers. I'm going to be real with you guys. If I was going to go for an Axis power that was a minor power that could not only be very flavorful, but actually do well, I'd go for the Hungarians every single time. I think they are very good. But speaking of good minor Axis powers, we have got Italy. A little bit like with France, saying Italy is a minor faction is kind of doing them a disservice. They have an incredibly fleshed out model line from Warlord Games, and their rules are unique and quite good. Technically, the Italians only get one army special rule, defensive strategy. In reality, this gives you 3 bonuses, so actually you get 3 army special rules. Firstly, you can re-roll the dice on the artillery barrage and smoke barrage table. That's quite nice. Secondly, during the first turn of the game, the enemy cannot order their units to run. That is huge. Movement wins games. Locking your enemy's movement in the first turn could allow you to get onto objectives early, could allow you to get into defensive positions ahead of time, could allow you to set up in the first turn whilst the enemy is floundering, and then from that onwards, you don't need to move. So you can just start pouring the fire on. And speaking of pouring the fire on, like with some of the other manufacturers we've seen, any Italian unit that is set up on the table before turn 1 may start the game in ambush. So your opponents can't run, and then they're getting hammered by ambushes. That combo of special rules is way more powerful than a lot of people are giving it credit for. That is going to force your opponent into an uphill battle, giving the Italians an early lead, and that might be a lead the enemy struggles to overcome. But it's not just their special rules which are making me eye up an Italian army for the channel, it's also their unit selection. They do get basic infantry sections, which can be inexperienced or regular, and they can be equipped to be engineers and get flamethrowers, which is pretty cool. But it starts getting very cool when you look at some of the unique choices. They've got the San Marco Marines. These are veteran. You can take up to 9 men in a squad, and they get the behind enemy line special rule. They get to ignore the -1 modifier to the order test when coming onto the table from outflanking. You then have the Black Shirts Militia. They start off at regular. You can have up to 11 men in a squad, and they can get an SMG and an LMG. But the big thing is their classic non-testati special rule. Immediately before the opponent rolls to hit when shooting or for casualties in close combat versus a black shirt section, its controller rolls a d6. On a 1 to 2, the section loses its will to fight and gains shirkers. On a 3 to 4, the section remains the same, and on a 5 to 6, the section is filled with patriotic bravery and gains fanatic. Apply the ability before resolving the shooting or close combat. The result rolled then applies to the rest of the game. This is one of the best special rules because it's just really cool. And I know that Salty Simon, the Admiral, the man that does a lot of bot action and 40k battle ports with me, is going to be very happy that his black shirts are as unreliable as ever. And these are just a couple of examples. You've got the Alpini, the Bersaglieri, the Paracaduzzi, you've got the colonial troops, all sorts of things. The Italians also get cavalry, machine guns, and the usual weapon teams that you would expect. And they also have all of the howitzers that you could want from light to heavy. They are limited on medium anti-tank guns though, so they can't get heavy anti-tank guns, but most time medium will get the job done anyway. The Italians also get lots of unique armor choices they can draw upon. None of them particularly powerful, but they are distinctive to the army. You have light tankettes bristling with medium machine guns like the Fiat 3000, and you've got your disingenuously named medium tanks, which are actually damage value 8+, making them light tanks, but hey, at least they are showing willing. One of the things that you notice about Italian armor is it does tend to be a little cheaper than other people's tanks, but the reason for this is they often have quite bad downsides. Like the tankettes have got 1-man turret and slow, and then the medium tanks have got vulnerable because of their riveted construction, so everyone gets extra AP when shooting the sides or rears. If you start looking at their self-propelled guns, like the light Semovente, it is not only vulnerable, it's also open-topped. Or you go for the heavy Semovente, which is no longer open-topped, but is still vulnerable, making it very easy to pen it on the side armor. And considering it's got a fixed main gun, those side shots will be coming in. In summary, the Italians are not really a minor faction at this point. They have enough unique rules and special units to easily count as a major faction. They are not the most powerful army. Their strength is definitely in their infantry, and their weaknesses is definitely in their vehicles. But they're going to look damn good on the tabletop, and they're going to feel really nice to use. From the sunny Mediterranean to the frozen north of Scandinavia, we have another minor allied faction, the Norwegians. The Norwegian army special rules is battlefield knowledge. They can start the game in ambush, and they also have fieldcraft the first turn, and they ignore the -1 auto test for outflanking. This is very similar to the Greeks. Unfortunately, whilst these special rules are quite good, they do not have the unit selection to back it up. My God, is it limited? I mean, they get officers, medics, and forward observers. They get infantry sections, machine gun teams, sniper teams, and mortar teams, and they get howitzers. That is it. They do not get medium anti-tank guns or any kind of anti-tank gun. They do not get any kind of vehicle apart from common transport vehicles. I'll give you a clue. That's a truck. I mean, Jesus, only their veteran infantry can take anti-tank grenades. I don't see Norwegians winning any tournaments anytime soon. I mean, hey, they get skis for free. They're going to be skiing everywhere. But their infantry sections get 1 LMG. There's no SMGs in there. They could be engineers. So technically you can take an engineer platoon. That's good. You might be able to laminate yourself against some people in cover. The machine gun team can have a tripod mount, giving it 360-degree line of sight. That's cool. But no. They can take medium mortars, but not heavy mortars. I mean, I'm trying to pad this bit out. There's nothing here, guys. There's nothing here. If you collect a Norwegian army, you are a brave, beautiful motherfucker, and I wish you the best of luck in every game that you play. Moving swiftly on, we have the Partisans. Their army special rules are battlefield knowledge. They get the turn 1 ambush thing, they get the turn 1 infantry capturing fieldcraft thing, and they get the thing where you outflank and you ignore the -1 order test for coming onto the board. They also have home country. When fighting against partisans, enemy snipers, observers, and spotters cannot use their special deployment rules and must instead be deployed like the rest of the force. In addition, enemies cannot outflank the partisans, but must always come in from their own table edge when arriving from reserves. We've talked about this kind of rule already. It is very good for screwing up your opponent's forward deployers, which keeps your officers safe, screws over their artillery, and can hard counter certain factions who like coming in from outflanking. As you might expect, the partisan unit selection is somewhat limited, but very, very distinctive. For example, rather than getting forward artillery or forward air observers, they get liaison officers. These count as forward air observers, but you can't take an artillery version. You've then got the partisan squad, which is going to make up the bulk of your forces. This starts off with 5 men, and you can take up to an additional 15 men for a total of 20 bods in one squad. These can either be inexperienced, regular, or veteran. Up to 3 of your men can take shotguns, which count as rifles with an 18-inch range and assault, and any man in the squad can take a submachine gun. You could have a 20-man SMG squad. My God! The firepower! The pure, unadulterated, point-blank firepower! I don't know of any other unit in the entire bot action that can run up to someone and technically dump 40 shots into them in one go. That is filthy. Absolutely filthy, and I love it. Outside of these frankly broken partisan squads, you have a lot of other fairly standard issue things, such as the cavalry, which do cavalry things, the machine guns, which do machine gun things. But you do have a flamethrower team. I know, Partisans flamethrowers, madness. But the flamethrower does have an additional debuff called Poor Maintenance, where essentially after using the flamethrower, when rolling to determine if it runs out of fuel, it runs out of fuel on a 1, 2, or 3, rather than just a 1 or a 2. So 50-50, every time you fire this thing, it's out of fuel. You are also fairly limited on your artillery and anti-tank choices, with your field artillery being limited to light howitzers and your anti-tank guns being limited to light anti-tank guns. But where things get really crazy is with the captured vehicle special rule. A partisan force may include any vehicle with a damage value up to and including 9+. However, all captured vehicles must be purchased as inexperienced, and in addition, all armoured vehicles, damage value of 7+ or higher, have the unreliable special rule to represent a lack of maintenance and crew training. Now, let me be clear about something. It is any vehicle. You can go through all of the other factions, minor and major, and pick out your favourite vehicles and add them to a partisan force. Be they Jeeps and Cooper wagons, all the way up to Panzer IIIs, or some of the crazy Italian stuff, or the crazy Hungarian stuff. Yeah, they're inexperienced, so they're going to be hitting like shit, and they're not going to be paying attention to their orders, and they're going to be unreliable, so they get pinned out. But any vehicle? That is going to make for some incredibly diverse, cool, flavorful, unique, and distinctive looking armies. And I think it might be one of my favorite rules in all of bot action. I am sure someone is going to find a way to abuse this rule. I am sure from a competitive point of view, it's very abusable. You can take anything you want in this army. But from a modeling point of view, partisans are a dream come true. After the Partisans, we have another faction beginning with the letter P, Poland. I have to say, I have a real soft spot for Poland in World War II and the Polish faction in bot action. If I was to collect a minor faction, the first one that I would go for would definitely be the Polish. But with my bias out of the way, let's get into the special rules. No hope of retreat. Whenever a Polish unit fails a morale check and would otherwise be destroyed as a consequence, take the test again and apply the second result. This reroll applies to all units facing this situation, including infantry, artillery, and vehicles that suffer an on-fire damage result. From a gameplay perspective, this is essentially an upgraded, supercharged version of the USSR rule. That one only applies to infantry and artillery. This one applies to all of your units, making an already very powerful rule even better. On top of this, you have battlefield knowledge. This is something we've seen in a few factions now. Any Polish unit that's set up on the table before turn 1 could start an ambush, and you also get fieldcraft turn 1 on your infantry, and you can also outflank and ignore the -1 modifier to the order test. This combination of special rules is going to make the Polish a devil of an army to face off against. Not only are you going to need to wipe their units out to a man in order to be able to get rid of them, but also they're going to have that turn 1 advantage where you're taking pins from their ambushes and they are just running around taking advantage of that fieldcraft rule. However, whilst these army special rules are a lot to write home about, the unit selection of the Polish army is quite limited. It's not even really the units, it's the equipment that they have. And I think this reflects the fact that they are truly an early war army. Let's use the Polish infantry section as an example. It can be taken as inexperienced, regular, or veteran. And it's unique because it starts off with 6 men and can have up to an additional 13 men, giving you 19 soldiers in one squad. Now, outside of Partisans, that is the largest squad of guys you can get, as far as I'm aware, in this game. The problem is that they basically only have rifles. Everyone has a rifle, and one guy, no matter how big the squad is, one guy can have a BAR. That's right. No light machine guns, no SMGs, not even anti-tank grenades. It's a lot of rifles. And those rifles are going to doggedly hold on throughout most of the game thanks to their special rules. But they are going to struggle when they come up against better equipped or just any kind of armoured force. Because unfortunately, the Polish anti-tank selection is very limited as well. They do get anti-tank rifles and they do get anti-tank guns. But the anti-tank gun is limited to being a light AT gun. Your best bet is maybe to lean into howitzers or AA cannons. The howitzers can get up to heavy howitzers. It's only Pen +4, which would be the same as a light anti-tank gun, but at least you've got a lot of pins you can start throwing around as well. And the AA automatic cannon can be upgraded to a heavy automatic cannon for 15 points. So for 50 points in total, you do get a fairly chunky shot from that heavy AA gun. But unlike so many other armies who can turn to their armoured core to do the anti-tank job, the Polish can't do that. They have got tankettes, they've got light tanks, they've got everything from Renault FTs, R35s, they've got 7 TPs, they've got armoured cars coming out of the wazoo. But unfortunately, many of these vehicles have got debuffs like one-man turret or slow, or any anti-tank guns they do have tend to be low velocity light anti-tank guns. None of them can get a medium anti-tank gun or anything like that. And many of them also have rules like vulnerable, which means that they can be popped fairly easily. They are very cheap and they are very spammable. And there's a hell of a lot of machine guns being thrown around. And if you look at the tankettes, you can even get a light autocannon on the tankette, which is pretty good. It's running around, armor 7 plus autocannon. Can't complain about that. Maybe the way to win with the Polish is to spam those autocannons, just trying to pin as much up as possible. But I think that is the biggest weakness of the Poles. They have got large, reliable units of infantry. They have got a very wide variety of affordable light armor. But to deal with tanks, they have to pin them up. And sometimes that'll work, but sometimes you actually need to kill a unit to be able to defeat an enemy army. And I think their inability to really handle heavy armor is going to be a big problem for them. One thing I do like about the Polish army, though, is I like the narrative you can build behind the army. If you were doing a narrative campaign or historical campaign with you and a friend or a friend group, you could have one of your players start that campaign off playing as Poland in the early war, and then they could naturally transition to using their army as partisans to represent the Polish home army, which is a lot of partisan activity throughout the war. It's now time to move on to our last Axis force for action, and that is Romania. The Romanians have two army special rules. They have Axis support, so like Bulgaria and Hungary, they can take that German or Italian unit, and they also have French artillery doctrine, which gives them the same extra bombardment as the British and the French get. Whilst neither of these special rules are overly exciting or unique, they are perfectly serviceable, and what I like about them is it's very easy to feel them every single game. It's not like, let's say, the US, where you might never take advantage of gyro stabilizers. If you just put in an artillery observer, you will get the advantage of French artillery doctrine. And you're probably going to want to lean on Axis support anyway, because you're a minor faction, so your unit selection is somewhat limited. Speaking of unit selections, the Romanians do get everything that they need to build a standalone army, and they even get a couple of things that distinguish them from other Axis minor powers. For example, their infantry sections can be taken up to 14 men strong, and they also get 2 LMGs per squad. Most of the time when you're a minor faction, if you're lucky, you get the 1 LMG. It's worth mentioning in passing as well that their cavalry section is similar to the Bulgarians, where they can't charge into battle whilst mounted, but what separates them is they can get a Panzerfaust. Speaking of anti-tank, they also get Panzerschreck teams. I don't think any of the other Axis minor factions can get Panzer Shreks. That's quite a good way of the Romanians plugging their anti-tank problems. And ironically, if you know your Stalingrad history, the Romanians get lots of other anti-tank options as well. They can upgrade their howitzers to medium and heavy howitzers, which, as we've seen, can do some anti-tank stuff with the pins, but they could just take heavy anti-tank guns. They are one of the few minor powers that do get access to full-blown heavy anti-tank gun teams. Where they struggle, where the downside is the vehicles. They only get two. They get a tank, which is the Renault R35, which is frankly awful. It is a light tank with a low velocity light anti-tank gun and a hull mounted medium machine gun. It is one-man turret, it is slow, and the low velocity anti-tank gun means it's only armor pen +3. It is armored all round though, but it's a light tank, so being armored all round means diddly squat. They do also get the Takam Tank Destroyer. This is 105 points and it comes with a hull mounted medium anti-tank gun, but it's only armor 7+ and it's open topped and it gets no kind of anti-infantry option. There's no medium machine gun there, crew served or hull mounted. Because of this, I do think that the Romanians are principally an infantry force. It is very tempting to use your Axis support slot to put a tank in here, but you need 2 tanks for an armored platoon, and I feel like getting one good tank and then a couple of crappy tanks isn't the best way of using that Axis support. You don't need to take that Axis tank to be good at defeating other enemy tanks, because you've got access to heavy anti-tank guns, you've got access to Panzer Shreks. Interestingly, where I think the Romanians are best to put that slot is a Nebelwerfer. Ally in a German Neb, put it in a platoon you were already taking, like an artillery one, with those heavy anti-tank guns and those howitzers, and then use that to bring lots of good HE to the table. Combine that with your infantry-based anti-tank and your surprisingly well-equipped infantry sections, and I think you'll have an army that will be able to punch well above its weight. We now come to the penultimate minor faction, the Netherlands. For their special rules, they have the forward artillery doctrine, giving them that extra artillery barrage from an artillery observer, and they also have highly motivated reserves, allowing their inexperienced units to potentially remove 1 pin. There's not much more to say about these special rules that hasn't already been said, so let's move on to the unit selection. Here we have a fairly limited offering. You will find the usual accoutrement of officers and observers and medics and regular infantry. They do get some motorcycle guys, which are kind of cool. You get anti-tank rifles and machine guns. The mortars can be upgraded to medium, but not heavy. The howitzers can be upgraded to heavy, but they do come with the severely outdated rule. Antiquated Dutch artillery is not precise enough to fire accurate artillery bombardments, and there's always these assists at the target unit when firing indirect fire, even if firing on the same unit in subsequent turns. That is awful. That is totally awful, man. Yeah, I wouldn't bother with the Dutch artillery. I'd go for those medium mortars all the way. Yeah. Interestingly, they can't take their mortars as light. They can only take medium mortars, which is kind of interesting. Anti-tank guns are limited to light anti-tank. They can take AA guns, which could be upgraded to heavy AA guns, which is probably your best bet. What jumps out to me on the infantry part is the Indonesian infantry sections, which come as 5-man strong, have to be inexperienced, and they get rifles. You can add up to 6 men to the unit, but they're unarmed. You could give them pistols for 1 point each. You can't give them rifles. And 1 man may have a light machine gun, 15 points, although I don't think I'd bother because of the fact that they're inexperienced. You can make them shirkers and reduce the costs of them by 2 points per man. Essentially, if you want some inexperienced meat to throw into the grinder, you can go for the Indonesian infantry section, but it doesn't feel great, to be honest. What I have noticed about the Netherlands is they have a weirdly wide variety of armor, and they can get quite a lot of heavy machine guns. For example, you've got the light tank, which is the Vickers light tank, which comes with 1 HMG and 1 coaxial medium machine gun. And you can replace that coax medium machine gun with another HMG for 15 points. So for 90 points, you can have a double HMG tank. That's pretty good. Even better though, you can have a Marmon Harrington CTLS, which is where you take the light tank, replace all weapons with 2 forward-facing hull-mounted medium machine guns and 1 turret-mounted medium machine gun for a total of 80 points. So 3 MMGs for 80 points. Now, that's someone who's run around with a Stuart 1 with 3 medium machine guns on it. That's really good. And this sort of odd trend of just being able to add more and more machine guns to all of your vehicles is prevalent throughout the Netherlands vehicle choices. You've got the overall wagon truck, which starts off with 1 front-facing medium machine gun, and then you can start adding on an HMG to it, and you can add 2 additional medium machine guns on it as well. You can even replace all of its guns with a rear-facing light howitzer, which it then loses the recce rule, but it's got a light howitzer. You've got all of your transports and tows, your armoured carriers. They can just start strapping machine gun after machine gun onto these things. So I suppose the unique thing about the Netherlands is they get a lot of light vehicles, which are absolutely packing. But the disadvantage of the Netherlands is they basically have no anti-tank, and the howitzers are pretty bad. And last, but amazingly not least, we have got Belgium. And you may note a tone of surprise in my voice, but I'm looking through the Belgian rules and I actually think they're pretty good. Firstly, you have got forward artillery doctrine, extra bombardment, and you've got highly motivated reserves, so you can remove a pin here and there, and you also get the VB launcher. You get the same special rules as the French. Now, considering I said the French weren't really a minor faction, it's pretty impressive when what is almost inarguably a minor faction gets the same special rules as them. But where I'm really blown away, what's blown my socks off, is the options and capability of their units. First up, their infantry sections are bonkers. They can have up to 10 men in a squad, and sure, they're only inexperienced or regular, but they can have a submachine gun, they can have a BAR, they can have a VB launcher. Everyone can be made engineers, but what really stands out to me is they can be like Japanese grenadier squads. You may designate 1 regular infantry section per rifle platoon to be a grenadier section. The grenadier section cannot have a BAR or a VB launcher, but up to 3 men may be given light mortars. That is amazing. And then you've got their chasseurs, which can have 11 veterans in a squad. And again, they get the machine gun, they get the BAR, they get the VB launcher, but they can also all be upgraded to tough fighters. You've got a viable assault unit there. And if you think the surprises stop there, well, I've got news for you, buddy boy. The hits keep on coming. Their medium machine guns can be upgraded to heavy machine guns. Heavy machine guns are great in 3rd edition. Their field artillery, like so many others, can be medium, heavy, or light, just to pay for which one you want. But the big one, the one that makes them potentially a genuine standalone faction in my mind, is their anti-tank guns are not light AT. Having access to only light AT can be such a limiting factor, because it means if you just come across a German player who's just brought like 3 medium tanks, which is going to happen, then you just cooked, right? But Belgium cannot take light AT. Belgium gets medium anti-tank guns as standard. Pop 2 or 3 of those in your list, and you are Gucci. I'm not going to lie to you though, it does somewhat go off a cliff edge when we get to the vehicles. The light tanks they can get are essentially Renault FTs, although they can remove the pitifully slow rule for 20 points. And they can get a low velocity light tank gun if you want, but you never want to pay for that. Their tank destroyers, I think, are very ironically named because they have a forward-facing light anti-tank gun. You're not going to destroy any tanks with a light AT gun. And you could replace all weapons with a turret-mounted light anti-tank gun with a coaxial automatic rifle. Woo! Get a BAR on there. Which is kind of good because you still get 2 shots from it like an LMG. Armoured cars, you've got the Minerva, which is a pintle-mounted forward-facing medium machine gun for 60 points on an Armour 7+, but it is recce. So don't poo-poo it too much, I suppose. You've got the ACG -1. I know it's -1, I was just being facetious. One turret-mounted light anti-tank gun with coaxial medium machine gun. It's 135 points. Boo! It's a light tank. It's okay. It's got recce. Yay! It's alright, but if you're noticing, they seem to have a lot of light AT in their vehicles, and a lot of that has got anti-infantry, but it's like you have to pick between one or the other. There's no hull-mounted medium machine guns to try and perk things up a little bit. The transports and tows seem to have gone the Netherlands approach and giving you the ability to strap all sorts of machine guns to them if you want. You've got the Citroen half-track, add a machine gun to it. You've got the field car, add a machine gun to it. You've got the armoured tractor. You can't add a machine gun to that, but you can make it slow for -10 points. I don't know why you would, but you can. In summary, Belgium actually can be taken as a standalone army and actually has the options to make that standalone army do okay. Are you going to win any tournaments with them? Probably not. Are you going to go to tournament and get your shit pushed in every game? No. Leave that to the Norwegian players. But I think that just about covers it. We have talked about every single major and minor faction in Bolt Action 3rd edition, and we've delved into their distinctive features and done a high-level summary of their advantages and disadvantages. And if there is one thing that jumps out at me about all of these armies, is every single one of them has at least one or two things that makes them distinctive and unique. Whether it is the large rifle-armed polar sections or the mad SMG spam of the Partisans, or going over to the major factions, you've got how the Japanese play very differently to everyone else, or you've just got the Germans with their phenomenal special rules and their phenomenal unit selection. Every single army is going to feel different when you play it on the tabletop, even if some of them do share special rules. And this, I think, makes for a game where it's easy to understand what your opponent's army does, whether it's an obscure faction or a major faction, and it's going to feel different every single time you play a new faction. But of course, all of this is just like my opinion, man. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Out of all of the factions we have talked about today, which one do you think is the strongest and which one is your favorite? If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to smash that like button and also subscribe to never miss an episode. Would you like to know more? If so, then please consider becoming a channel member or patron. By supporting the channel, not only will you be doing your part, but you'll also be helping me create more content for your viewing pleasure and unlocking a whole host of perks. You get everything from a badge next to your name, custom emojis, but the big one is access to the Mordian Glory Discord server, an online community with almost 2,500 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord. We've got channels for army lists, hobbying, tactics, stories, and even a pretty spicy meme section as well. For all you greenhorns that wanted to see the Mordian glory hole, today is your lucky day. And joking aside, I do want to say a massive thank you to all of the current channel members and patrons. You guys are amazing. Truly the lifeblood of the channel. I could not do Mordian Glory full-time without the incredible and generous support of my members. So thank you guys so much. And last but certainly not least, I want to say a personal thank you to all of my top tier Patreons. These are the War Masters, the people who have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So a heartfelt thank you to Alex Dengal, Bon Vert, Lord Pryor, Mark Panconi, RJ Scorpion, Swordfish Trombone, Try Again Bragg, John Stubbs, Nick Walsh, Diesel Fox, and August Barney. Seriously, guys, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your support is incredible and it makes a huge difference. Thank you so much. That's all for now. Hope you've all enjoyed today's video. And of course, as always, I'll see you guys next time.